some reason, I you were on the left side, you were on the right side, I was on the left, and now we've switched places on my screen here. At any rate, audience, welcome to You Don't Have to Yell, the webcast and podcast focused on electoral reform and minor party activism throughout the United States. I'm your host, Dan Sally, and apparently our streaming software has been infected by a poltergeist, so bear with us for any issues. I am here with Jo'Nathan Kingfisher, the newly minted co-chair of the Wisconsin Green Party. And thanks for joining me, Jo'Nathan. How are you doing?
Great. Doing very good today.
Good to hear. Good to hear. And I'll set the stage for you all, because as I mentioned, we just had a weird technical glitch with the web streaming software that could cause some issues throughout. So bear with us. Number one. Number two, Jo'Nathan and I are both possibly doing this at the worst possible times for both of us personally. I am at home with 4 children who are home on Christmas break. Jo'Nathan, I know you have kids at home as well. How many do you have now?
2 of my own. My son is just turned 5. He turned 5 on Christmas, and my daughter is 6.
Oh, nice.
And my stepson is 16, going on 32.
Yeah, I've got a 21 who's going back on 16, so it kind of
goes both ways.
Kind of comes full circle, yeah. And so at any rate, there may be some interruptions as well. So just keep that in mind, everyone. It is Christmas season, and you know, kind of before we get into the politics stuff, you know, one of the things I know when we spoke prior to this taping was that you actually run a homeschool, correct? So you homeschool your children.
Correct.
Yeah, and you actually do an Ojibwe immersion program, correct?
That is correct as well.
Can you talk about that? Because I just found that absolutely fascinating.
Sure. Well, first of a traditional Ojibwe introduction. Zibisen Nadiznakas. Zibisen is my middle name, and it is also my real name in Ojibwe.
Zibisen, okay.
And my artist and business name is ZB Kingfisher. There's lots of loan words from Ojibwe to English, like moose. Moose is the Ojibwe original, and that has gone into English as moose. Yeah. And also the Mississippi. And Misabe is giant, and Zibi is river, and Zibisen is lots of little rivers, and Ogishki Manisi is my family clan spirit, and it is also the Kingfisher bird, and that is what my last name is from and for, the Kingfisher bird. And Odawa Zaheganing dash Get Waswaganing. Old Waswaganing is the traditional place that my father line is from here in northern Wisconsin. And traditionally Ojibwe is through the father lines, though with modern tribal enrollment, that's, it's just from either parent you get your blood quantum from. So I am not a federal tribal member. I'm not a federal tribal Indian. I am ethnically Ojibwe from my father's bloodline. So he raised me speaking Ojibwe. He was a professor of history, a Native American Indian professor of history, American history, and world history. And he was also head librarian and academic dean. So I grew up in the university environment, and one of the things, my dad's mom is from the Stuntz family, and Albert Conrad Stuntz was an original U.S. government translator for the treaties, and he surveyed both the reservations and the counties originally. And so there's even a road, Stuntz Road, that is named in honor of my dad's mom's family.
Got it. So you go way back in all different directions in the area then.
Right. And I will also say there's an island, Moningwanakong, the Golden Flicker Bird Island, which is the Ojibwe capital islands, known as Madeline Island, and the town on Madeline is La Pointe. La Pointe was the very first corporation in Wisconsin, so it was a product of the marriage of Ojibwe Native American Indian people and incoming European descendant people. So Wisconsin started originally. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan were all Michigan territory, and when that got divided up, the Ojibwe people and the European descendants were critical in architecture of the Wisconsin government and society. Out of La Pointe, which was the first corporation of Wisconsin, a mining and railroad company.
It's fascinating because so my entire bloodline in the United States goes back to like 1920, something like that, like 1925. My family all came over from Ireland in the last migration. So, I mean, when I talk to people who have these bloodlines that just go back, I mean, centuries, and in your case, like millennia, it absolutely blows my mind. And one of I know we had talked too, like, so I'm a huge language geek. I know you're raising your kids not just learning Ojibwe, but they're learning a bunch of different languages, correct?
Right. Well, they've been exposed to a dozen regular languages, and it's the biggest thing I can say about that is after years of growing up with a dozen different languages, they listen to those languages now with patience when other languages that they had not been exposed to kind of bore them out, and they're not so interested in spending time with those languages.
So indulge my language geek here. In terms of like when you look at Ojibwe and English comparatively, are there any concepts that just blow English speakers' minds when they get introduced to the language, or no?
Well, the experience of the vowels is quite different. Ojibwe is a very musical language, and the vowels come in quarter notes, half notes, and whole notes.
Okay. So it's go on. Sorry.
Well, no, it's great. I mean, I kind of joked with you earlier that Ojibwe has been called the Welsh of Native America for its length, and among Ojibwe speakers, I sort of get called sing-songy. My dad was a musician. He played piano for his whole life, and he actually played the carillon, the bell tower at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. And so we're very musical people. In fact, it's been said every word is a song and a prayer. So we're supposed to use our words with that appreciation of their influence and power.
Do you know, it's so funny you say that, because when I was learning Mandarin, and I got to maybe like a beginner level and then had to stop. So I remember I've forgotten more than I remember. But I remember the tones of Mandarin, which a lot of English speakers have problems with. I remember I kind of was able to adapt to those by singing the language in a way. And it doesn't sound like Ojibwe is not tonal. It doesn't sound like, but it sounds like there's some element of timing that's going to dictate the meaning. Am I hearing that correctly? Or
yeah, definitely. Now, I think as far as concept, the biggest difference in going to the grammar is that there is no inherent pronoun reference for he or she. It's just you or the person you're speaking, me, I, the person you're speaking to, you or them, they over there. And so that takes care of a lot of kind of we're in the Green Party, we're dealing with trying to include everybody and that gender diversity. I went to India at one point. I think there were 5 different genders at the place I was at. There's, as far as male, female, in the middle, on this side, on that side. I'm not quite sure, but it's just personhood as far as actors. me, you, them. And then there is a grammatical difference between living and non-living. And we're not talking about biological living or biological non-living. We're talking about energetically living or energetically not living, which also goes over to, is it interesting? Is it meaningful? Is it not interesting? Is it not meaningful?
Yeah. It's so I got into a conversation with my daughter about this because we were talking about preferred pronouns and everything. And I was talking about how in Mandarin there's one pronoun for every gender. They're written differently. So he, she, it exist in writing, but they don't exist in speech. And on the flip side, the Romance languages, and I speak decent Portuguese and okay French. The Romance languages have gender assignments to everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, like in a gender neutral world, how do you say the lamp in French? And it's at any rate, I find it very interesting. The conversations around gender super interesting from just a linguistic perspective, because how that's going to take place in Ojibwe, for instance, or how that's going to take place in English or Mandarin is going to be vastly different,
And one more point I guess I would make,
Yeah.
which relates to politics, is in Ojibwe, Anishinaabe. Anishinaabe is a more general word that sort of means indigenous, native, aboriginal, everybody's included. Ojibwe, literally, the way I was raised with speaking, means those who speak. So, and in fact, at Lac du Flambeau Reservation, which is a French name, it's not Ojibwe name. It was the elders specifically published that if an Ojibwe person doesn't speak Ojibwe, they weren't to be considered Ojibwe. Well, the Bureau of Indian Affairs got rid of that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But a very important part for Ojibwe Anishinaabe politics is the grammar always says who does what to who or what. There's never a non-personal actor. If something happens in the world, if the government officials do something, if the corporate people do something, it's always somebody doing it. And what are they doing? They're doing something specific to something or somebody, or they're just doing it themselves.
Yeah. Well, God bless you for bringing it back to politics, because I did tell you that I was going to take us down a linguistic rabbit hole if I could. Kind of dovetailing on that, you're right near, up in Ashland, you're right near an Ojibwe reservation as well, correct?
Ashland is a border town to Bad River Reservation. Of course, in Bad River, it's Mashkizibi, which means strong medicine river. And it's also just south of Red Cliff Reservation, although they have a little bit more luxurious, well-to-do border town on their side. And then there's a town in between the two border towns across the bay.
Yeah, and the reason we were both laughing at Bad River Reservation, for those who are unfamiliar with this aspect of American history, is anytime indigenous people had a holy site, whether it was a river, mountain, or whatever, the European settlers would automatically change it to something bad. So Bad River, Bad Water, Devil's Mountain.
Yeah. I mean, just a caveat there. The word for bad in Ojibwe is maji, and the word for strong, the root of strong and medicine, is mashki. So mashki and maji, you can get them mixed up. And I'll tell you, it's a floodplain, and the river floods, and when it floods, it's bad.
All right.
So,
okay.
There's some caveats.
So we'll cut the Europeans some slack and just assume it was bad Ojibwe that caused the problem.
Well, both sides. I remember we married into each other.
True enough. And so, how much do tribal politics or tribal policies come into play up there, and maybe how much does that play into maybe some of the things you're doing with the Green Party as well?
The biggest issue I think I feel confident saying this, the biggest issues would be mining threats and CAFOs, confined animal operations, where there's a large amount of feces spilled into our water.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two biggest that I can think of. And I'll have to say, the Bad River tribal government themselves did an incredible job. We had a multi-billion-dollar mining company come in here, and I mean, they wanted to take out this town down the road. They wanted the rocks a mile deep. They wanted every bit of it. And somehow, I don't know how, the tribal government got rid of this company. They sent them down the road. I mean, it was going to destroy us. It was going to
Yeah.
destroy us. And so I'll also say, I grew up in southern Michigan, just half an hour south of the capital, Lansing, a small liberal arts college town. My dad was professor, academic dean, librarian there. And it just down the road from there was the largest continental oil spill of American history. It was the Kalamazoo River spill. And that place, it was my old stomping grounds, my old walking grounds, my old running grounds. And I saw that place destroyed. And
Mm-hmm.
I had to leave because of oil bomb outs. I mean, for 5 years, Enbridge Corporation knew about oil leaks, and they didn't. They're making their money. They're not. They own the cleanup company. They make money when it spills. I would. The nearest cleanup crew to that spill was here in near Ashland. It's a 17-hour drive. They had to go down there to clean it up. And now at the end of my road, at the end of the farm road, dirt road,
Yeah.
is the Line 5. So I have been completely supportive of Michigan's governor, Whitmore, for executive order, shut down Line 5. That is the biggest threat to our watershed, to our life, to our existence. And we have the right to exist. And this foreign company, this Canadian company I mean, my neighbors get threatened because their kids talk bad in college about Enbridge. Enbridge phones my neighbors up and threatens eminent domain on them for public relations control. That's the biggest threat we got. And when I came back, I was teaching math and science in Hopi and Navajo in Arizona. And I came back for the language culture crisis to revitalize our language and culture. And what I was told by the veterans of our tribe was that if they mine us out, if they destroy us with oil, what good is our language and culture? Because we're not going to be here to live it or speak it. So that's a big deal to us. Our water, our clean environment, our clean air, our food from the land.
Yeah. And it sounds too, just to kind of reemphasize the point, it sounds like this is existential for the
Big.
folks up there, right?
It's big.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of getting back to your upbringing then, and your, you growing up in Michigan, is that what kind of drew you to the Green Party? Like, were you always Green Party based on that, or did you go through some sort of political journey that got you there?
Oh, well, no, I grew up Democratic. My
Okay.
parents voted Democratic. I mean, I voted Democratic, and I grew up in nature, and that led me to get my biology degree. I got a bachelor's in biology. I got a bachelor's degree in language and culture under anthropology at Michigan State, and my biology degree was from a small liberal arts college, Alma College in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And I started that with zoology and industrial design. And I switched it to general biology and exercise health science. And then I got anthropology with Asian studies. And at the time that I got my second bachelor's, that was about the millennial. And that was at the time that Ralph Nader and Winona LaDuke were making their presidential bid. And that was a real eye-opening experience to me. That was a lot of disappointment. I really wanted Al Gore to. Actually, I voted for Nader over Al Gore because I saw Al Gore over there with the bankers saying your interests are my interests. And that didn't jive with what, needed to be happening 20 years ago. Well, what needed to be happening 20 years ago didn't happen. And I'm amazed that it seems all of the Democratic senators went for Bush. Well, okay. So all of the Democrats, when they could have gotten their guy in, he didn't fight for it, and they went for the Republicans. And then we went on to have an incredibly racist Middle Eastern set of wars. And I was a kid experiencing this incredible racism towards Middle Eastern people and kind of trying to hide in the shadows because I didn't, I didn't want that onslaught of racism towards me as well.
Yeah. And to bring folks up to speed too, 2000 was, a couple things happened in 2000. Number one, of course, there was that electoral victory for Bush that was won in the Supreme Court that ultimately solidified his presidency. Now, of course, where we still have talk of overriding a loss of, or overriding a victory of 7 million votes in this country, it seems laughable, but at the time, Bush won Florida by a razor thin margin in the popular vote. And again, I think there was, to your point, if there were ever a time where the Senate could contest the Electoral College, or ever a time when senators from another party should ask questions, it was back then. The margin was just that thin. And of course, Al Gore was the popular vote winner if you take Florida. Even if you keep Florida in the equation, he was a popular vote winner on the national level. The second part of that, and I think probably more applicable to what you're doing now, is that seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems to me like the moment the Democrats and the Greens started feuding, because that was the moment that Ralph Nader got enough popularity to be viewed as a spoiler. Am I wrong there, or no?
Well, let me take it back. The last alternative candidate that got anywhere close to traction in the United States political system was Ross Perot. I remember after he scared the establishment, there were all kinds of mechanisms and things done to make sure that would never happen again.
Yep.
And I feel that's sort of to a lot of the split between Democrats and Green Party, though. Yeah. Go ahead.
No. I think you're right there. Like, Ross Perot was the first candidate to really threaten the major party establishment. He got somewhere around, I think it was 20% of the popular vote in 1992. I can't remember where he landed in 96. Wasn't nearly as much. But after that, the Republicans, for whatever reason, were able to kind of keep their base secure enough, whereas the Green Party has always appeared to be able to eat a little more, or pull more people over from the Democratic side. And a lot of what I hear from folks in the Green Party as well is similar to you. They started as Democrats, but what they saw was that the values they had, the values that made them Democrats to begin with, weren't necessarily the values of the party anymore.
Right. And I mean, at that time, I distinctly remember Hillary Clinton publicly stating that she wished Ralph Nader would get shot. And that, affected my mental and emotional a little bit. Yeah.
Well, and I talked about this with Barbara Dahlgren as well, who, for those watching or those who are listening on the podcast, was a guest on the podcast earlier in the month. But I think one of the big bones of contention obviously was in 2016 when Hillary lost by very thin margins in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and so on. A lot of that was heaped on the Green Party, or a lot of the blame, but also in my mind, if you couldn't beat a candidate with the level of unfavorability that Donald Trump had going into the election, then there's something you did too. It's not all Jill Stein.
Right. And there's another moment in American political history that I remember. At one point, Obama, and I voted for Obama, he addressed legislatures and announced Citizens United. And he specifically said now untold amounts of influential money is going to go pouring into our system. And he sort of chastised that. But at the same time, all the legislatures were applauding because they were collecting. And I mean, I want to say Citizens United should be Citizens Excluded, should be Bribery Unlimited, should be Supreme Corruption.
I agree with all those titles, and we could vote on which one's the best one, but you are 100% on. You're 100% on point there. And one of the things that got me into this actually was originally this whole venture started as a project to get campaign finance reform implemented. And what I realized is there is no campaign finance law that can't be gutted in the courts. Not one. There's none. And the only way you're going to have accountable government is if the barriers that keep minor parties and alternative parties from gaining a voice or an equal voice to the two major parties, until you have that, the two major parties are never going to need to serve the bulk of the voters.
And yeah, I want to say a word for ranked choice voting.
Please.
That's the shout out. We're working for it. Maine's got it. A lot of places have got it. We're seeing good results with that, and we think that supports democracy, the democratic process.
Yep. Do you know? So I was actually just talking about this with the guy you may or may not know, Adam Friedman, who runs an organization called Rank the Vote. Big ranked choice voting activist out there. And the thing that we were talking about was if you look at countries with similar electoral systems as ours, so you look at Canada, you look at England, the UK, excuse me, you look at Canada, you look at the UK, these are countries that have a similar system for electing people in and similar barriers that allow our two major parties to exist, but they also have equal media access. So everybody gets an equal footing or equal media coverage. And that allows these minor parties to get their voice across, allows them to pick up some seats in parliament. And our feeling was that one of the things that came out of our conversation was that, ranked choice voting effectively makes every candidate a legitimate candidate. It makes anyone on the ballot not a spoiler. And so by virtue of that, they should and would get coverage in the media that's beyond just how do they impact the major party candidate. That's my feeling on it. I don't know if you have anything to say on that or at all.
Well, I hope that technology these days, such as podcast, can democratize the process a bit. I have a few points I just want to segue to. One is,
sure.
I know there's a lot of people that have some sort of affiliation or feeling for Native American Indian identity, ethnicity, heritage. And there's a difference between ancestors and predecessors, those that came before us and those that we came from. Well, I think that anybody that has any good feeling for Native America should support treaty rights. I'm not a federal Indian, but that is a great starting point. That there is federal Indian law, and it governs a lot. And there's been misuse and positive use of that, but at a basic starting point, I think treaty rights are a really great thing for everybody to support.
Can you explain that concept a little more in depth? Because I don't think. I think a lot of people aren't familiar with that, and I'd love to get that out there.
Well, it concisely, there was an exchange of land for arrangement, social
Mhm.
arrangement. And, it goes basically like, if the United States government and people cannot uphold a promise, uphold an agreement, we'd like the land back. Sometimes there's buybacks.
Mhm.
Sometimes the tribe has enough to purchase land back. Sometimes there's a strange arrangement where, somehow the land is given back. It's not very popular. It's not very common.
Yeah.
But that's essentially, there were agreements. There were, you know, now my European ancestor was a translator for the treaty process.
Yeah.
One of the things we should have asked for and got was a university. We should have gotten a university, a national university with professional programs that would produce lawyers and doctors and business people that could be the architects of our social order society. That
Mm.
didn't happen, and there's a racket on it. You can't legally represent other people unless you're a lawyer. You can't medically administer to other people unless you're a doctor. You can't, do the business paperwork unless you know the business ins and outs. When we should have translated better and gotten that to produce for our society, then we would have full members. For example, Green Party related, we got sued by the Democrats for a technicality to get us off the ballot this election because
Yep.
the vice presidential candidate had moved addresses and
In
it
the same
didn't.
town in Georgia. Sorry to interrupt. Moved
Yeah.
from one end of the town to the other end of the town and got thrown off the ballot for that. Sorry.
Okay. And no, it's good. We got sued, and all of the lawyers in Wisconsin are politicized. There's Democratic lawyers and there's Republican lawyers. And there
Mhm.
wasn't one Democratic lawyer that was going to represent our Green Party interests. So we had to hire a Republican and then got all kinds of flack for it.
Mhm.
And well, we need Green Party lawyers and we need Ojibwe lawyers to,
Mhm.
to create the society. And I've heard a lawyer once say, every aspect of legal work is social engineering.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Something I say every now and then on this show is that government and law exists effectively to keep us all from killing each other. That's why it exists. And so, when we talk about law, what we're talking about are things that maintain ideally a certain sense of justice. I want to, if you don't mind, I'd love to dig a little more into this concept of recognizing treaties and adhering to it, because I think a lot of times when you're talking about folks who don't have a lot of experience with tribal issues and with tribal politics, and I'll be first to admit I'm probably chief among them. I think the general perception you get is that it's really all about land. It's all about the fact that I right now am sitting on land that was once Wampanoag land, and now through a series of incidents over the course of time, I now am owner of this land. But from what you're saying, it sounds like there's a lot more than that. There's more than that, and maybe it's a little deeper than that, and maybe it's not simply who sits where. Am I wrong there, or no?
Well, no, that's a good part of it. I mean, a good part of it is land base.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's other factors. There's federally recognized tribes that do not have any land.
Mm-hmm.
They exist. Now, I'll say, according to the federal government, what they recognize as a tribe is a federally mandated land holding corporation. They treat the tribe as a corporation.
Okay.
And so, I mean, you have people that are ethnically Native American Indian, and
Mm-hmm.
you have federal tribal members, and that's not necessarily the same thing. You can
Mm-hmm.
have non-natives that are part of the tribe.
Okay.
It's a part of the federal Indian landholding corporation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about social order. It's about the language, about the culture, the doing. It's about where you're doing it, and the environment and the resources, the living texture of the land that you're interacting with, and it's also about the concept from the individual nation. Now there's 500, 700, 1,000, more than 1,000 different peoples, different
Mhm.
nations, and each one has its own articulation, it has its own way of expressing and conceptualizing, even individuality or collective being.
Mhm.
So there's uh, now I was mentored by a Hopi judge. He was quite an elder. He was a Katsina father. He ran ceremonies. He was a Arizona living treasure. And one of the things he said, he had to go to court for his Hopi language and culture to define it for the court. Well, one of the things he said was, all this Native American Indian is new age stuff. That's just come around. That's just created. Now we have a concept for it. It's Anishinaabe. That's indigenous, native, aboriginal.
Mhm.
However, there is a pan-Indian movement that was created by the federal government that are Indians.
Okay.
And that's a different identity than anything that existed prior to European arrival.
Okay. Okay. That's so kind of getting, maybe not to shift gears too dramatically, but just to maybe sum up what we've talked about thus far. It seems like from your background as well, there are a lot of tribal issues, a lot of issues of indigenous folks that really dovetails quite well with the Green Party platform, and especially
Well,
with their focus around industry, with their focus around preserving the environment and such. I'm sorry, I cut you off there.
oh no, that's great. No, I take your point, and yes, and I think one of the great things about the Green Party is its people are ready to say, this is occupied Ojibwe territory. This is
Mhm.
occupied Sioux Lakota territory. This is occupied Navajo territory. And everybody, and it's like a nice double dimensional existence. Well, yes, it is America. America was built. It was built out of Native America, and yes, that exists, and it exists dually with what didn't go away. We
Yeah. Is there any country that's done a good job of reconciling with the indigenous people? Because I think obviously America is probably the story we all know, but you have Australia, you have New Zealand, you have Canada. Like, when you look kind of across the world, is there any country where you'd borrow from, or is this a model that we really need to create on our own?
Well, I'm partial to my own place in the world and
Okay.
being. Yeah, I very much. And that's what I have authority to speak from. Although I'll
Yeah.
say New Zealand's pretty cool.
Mhm.
Maori's got lots of power and recognition. New Zealand just recognized rivers as people legally, and so did Bangladesh.
Okay.
There's lots that I think there's certainly some presidents that are indigenous in South America. There's lots that do go on, and in South America there has been tremendous tragedy and destruction of land, and
Mhm.
they have actually given land back and seen how within 10, 20 years native land use decision making can return health to land, and we
Mhm.
need that. We need
Yeah.
that a lot.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds kind of getting to the mission of the Green Party. It sounds like there's certainly a lot that could be borrowed, or there's a lot of common ground there, and a lot of things that, again, could be borrowed to better improve quality of life. I know I one of the things I always love to ask, and you've already really answered this, is what are some of the things that the Green Party's talking about that no other major party is? I think certainly the issue of indigenous people and some of the issues that are important to the people around, to the different nations around the country, I think are certainly something that's not being borrowed by any major party. Another question I wanted to ask you is, whenever I talk with minor party folks, there's also generally some things that really resonate well with your average voter. And, when you look at Wisconsin as a whole, are there specific aspects of the Green Party platform that you find resonate really well with your, nonpartisan Wisconsinite?
Right. Okay. Let me jump in here. I've
Yeah.
got some notes here. One thing I'll say is I don't really encourage or participate in is talking about a two-party system, because honestly, I really feel it's a one-party system. It's a corporate party system.
Yep.
I mean, they've got different takes. The violence changes a little bit depending who's in. We're nonviolent. The Green Party is nonviolent. Well, I will say also with minorities, it depends how you're counting it. It depends who you're hanging with. It depends on your crowd. Yeah, I will use minority in this term. Oftentimes, a minority is pejorial or insulting and used to kind of justify injustice. But I will say this. A central question I have had is, how will the sustainable minorities, the subpopulations, survive the unsustainable majority? Now, that's something I agree with. Now, I also, I want to talk about environmental tipping points and titration points. And if you're familiar with titration in chemistry, you drop into a solution until you reach the titration point, and everything changes instantly. Now, I think about documentaries such as Chasing Ice, the melting of the ice caps, or Chasing Coral, the bleaching of massive coral reefs. Those seem like titration points that we're getting near. Now, COVID, well, here we're chasing humans. and I studied Earth system science at Michigan State University 20 years ago, and the rise of pandemics was predicted because habitat destruction, wildlife exploitation, and it's warmer, viruses move easier. These things are important, and we're seeing it now. Well, there's a couple more points. Going back to my early time in the Green Party 20 years ago, I debated for the Green Party. I called people up to just talk to them about their political views. I spent time in business schools. Well, I found a real hate for nature in the Republican and Democrat. Oh, just wait. Hey. And I mean, they joked about it in a way, but it was deep. It was a deep hatred of nature, smashing nature. And what I heard from people is, we want strong leaders that keep us safe. And my reply was, well, what if you get strong leaders that abuse their power?
Yeah.
And so we brought a Mohawk activist to Flagstaff, Arizona one time, and she said she just finds that there's a general phenomena. People get really upset anytime there is the suggestion that their lives or choices could be or should be limited in any way. And there are some limits that people have to come to terms with. And, I think hate speech is not free speech. I think that's very important.
Well, that, is funny. So during the 2016 election, I was talking to some of my relatives in Ireland, and they couldn't believe the stuff that was allowed to be said. And the thing that they said is, they said in Ireland, someone like Trump would have been brought up on charges of inciting racial hatred, which, again, it's a debate to be had. Whether that's the type of thing we want in the United States. But I would agree with you. It's certainly a conversation that we haven't had.
Right. And a few more points. I mean, I don't believe in race as a biological reality. I think it's a social history that's reified.
Yeah.
Okay. And I also want to say, I don't believe in evil as an existential concept. I think evil boils down to ignorance.
Do you know, it's funny. One of the first month I did this podcast, I focused entirely on the issue of immigration. And the first guest I ever had was a professor of Asian studies from Williams College, and K. Scott Wong. Fascinating guy. And it was in that conversation that I realized that race is, like you said, it's a social construct. And really in the United States, it's a legal construct. Because obviously you had a case where the color of your skin meant you were either free or enslaved. When the mass migration from China specifically happened in the latter half of the 1800s, the reaction of the white population was, we don't want another enslaved race. So we need to figure out who these people are and how they fit in. And there were actually laws written that applied specifically to Chinese immigrants. And so in this country, and I can't speak to how it's done in other countries, but in this country specifically, there is a very strong legal history of codifying race. And I'm sure it's funny. This even goes back to a lot of what we're talking about with the tribal issues, where again, there is this social legal construct that you are of this bloodline. So here is where you exist. Here are the rights you're guaranteed under the law. And I don't think that as a population on the whole, I don't think we fully digested just how much legacy wiring our society and our government is operating on from this legal history.
Right, right. And, you know, a couple other false notions that seem to be really influential and popular. I think enemy civilization is a really dangerous false notion.
Mm-hmm.
And I also see in military individuals, military people that I have known, there's this idea that nature is only competitive. And I don't think that's true ecologically. Ecology is very cooperative. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things, you know, I started out zoology and industrial design.
Mm-hmm.
Well, evolution is a very important natural phenomena, but now it's an industrial process. The computers are so advanced, they do evolutionary processes and then spit out results.
Mm-hmm.
And American people need to understand that's something of the modern world, industrial evolution as well as biological evolution.
Yeah.
And in fact, the computers looked at mass extinctions, and one of the things that they thought was, when you have a big death of lots of species, then it creates the situation where you'll have lots more coming out. And the computers don't see that. Actually, what they find is the world can be degraded. There can be mass extinction, and it just stays that way as a poorer world, a more degraded world for quite some time. And we need to take note of that, since we're entering into the Anthropocene mass extinction that's, you know, going.
Yeah. Okay. Can I throw a total curveball at you?
Sure.
Okay. So, because you've touched on something I'm really interested in, which is the concept that, you know, the economy represents effectively the utilization of resources, right? And ideally, there should be physical boundaries to the economy, right? So, for example, I can't buy more oil than exists on planet Earth, in theory, because it is constrained by physical mass. Now, the one thing that the one element that I think has been thrown in over the last 2 decades that really skews that is the concept of debt. You know, and the idea that what we have seen in this country over the last 2 decades has been debt created, either, you know, first from 2000 to 2008 via effectively fake inflated mortgages, then from 2008 until now with quantitative easing, you know, with the Fed just introducing massive amounts of dollars into the system, making it easier for people to borrow. And so what we have is, we have a system where consumption is exceeding production, where what we can produce, or what we're actually producing as an economy, is far less than what we're consuming in kind. And so I bring this up to you kind of for 2 reasons. You know, number one, obviously there's this big environmental consequence of that, where we are not putting those natural limits to our consumption on us. But number 2, there's also the fiscal issue, which is very popular with especially folks on the right, which is the idea that, you know, the government just can't keep taking on more and more red ink without consequence. I know I just dumped a ton on you, but
good issues. Yeah.
But how are you feeling about this? I feel like somebody like you can handle this. So
yeah, well, let me say, I mean, I think that there, Well, Lacey, there's a need for understanding deep history of geological time.
Mhm.
Our atmosphere is in the condition that has only happened, 3 million years ago. I
Mhm.
mean, I mean, it's just connect the dots. Things are going to change. Things can't stay the same because
Yeah.
we've changed the parameters of the globe, really. Now, I also want to say I don't believe that there's any techno fix for the climate catastrophe. It's simple. We must stop fossil fuels. We must de-escalate fossil fuels. We must de-escalate nuclear, escalation. We must
Mhm.
de-escalate conventional weapon escalation. And I'll also point to, my dad was born in 1906. My mom was born, 1939. And in the 50s, I think about half of America was growing food, and it got pushed down to 2% of
Mhm.
people are growing food. And I mean, that was for big ag business and the ag dollar over good food security and sovereignty. And I think a return to sustainable local agriculture over industrial and slash and burn agriculture is imperative. And
Mhm.
and this pandemic has started people on the way. Figures have roughly doubled of people engaged in agriculture, which is great and needs to go farther. It's really strange. We've ended up with, what I think American government for the past 4 years under the Trump administration has been aristocracy, idocracy, criminocracy, and theocracy. We've
Mhm.
got rich people that, the only way you can hand over the keys to your kingdom to your idiot children is if you create an idocracy and a system of idiots and a system of crime. Now, the dictator of Russia and the dictator of Brazil have fully established criminocracies where those dictators cannot do a crime. It's in their law. Putin
Mhm.
cannot do a crime. Anything he does is the law. And the chump is so jealous.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, I also think people need to think about media criticism. There's what are people being programmed for, operated for? People listening, naive and gullible adherents don't perceive the trap. The system is not uplifting. The American system is supposed to encourage meritocracy, but the rich bought it. They rigged it for their offspring. They siphon off the people's labor.
Yep.
And corrupt establishment, corrupt governance, that's a one-party system. And I also want to say, I mean, we're running out of time, but
Yeah.
I
Go
want to
for it.
say people should think, you know, is it possible? Is it possible that Middle Eastern religious extremists are, I mean, race and class terrorists, oppressing Americans with racist, classist violence? Now, we've got maybe we do have some illegal settlements and occupation issues. We've got
Mhm.
American apartheid. Maybe we do. Maybe the continuation of slavery through the prison system is actually,
Mhm.
racism is a big issue. And institutional racism of American corporations sort of begins with police profiling. I mean, they set up the system. That's part of the job. I believe police accountability we should celebrate our police
Yeah.
and have them as uh, uh, on TV. I think their body cameras should be going all the time with a wide viewer access. And I'll also say there ain't no zealot like a traumatized zealot. And zealots that are, committed and devoted to the system that traumatized them, um, virulent culture is one of our problems. And if any listener has a glimmer of a suspicion that they might be that, please take extra effort to try to not be that.
Mhm. There's, do you know, There's a couple things I think worth noting here. First and foremost, getting back to something I said earlier, there are always things that I hear from minor party candidates or from minor party activists, Green Party, Libertarian, and so on, that aren't being talked about by the major parties and aren't being talked about in the media. And the reason they're not part of the media conversation is because our media in this country is built off access. And the way you give that access is you give incumbents a platform. And so all we ever get are the conversations that are framed by both major parties. So all we ever get are effectively, we're always eating at the table that they set for us. And we're never asking questions about the amount of money we spend on our military. What's the return on that? Are we doing more harm than good there? Just as an example, that's first and foremost. I think everybody needs to be abundantly clear on the fact that where you get your information, generally, where the majority of Americans get their information, is effectively are from institutions, are from outlets that are effectively reading the script provided for them by both major parties. That's number one. Number two, and I think something you said that was really interesting about police violence is, and I'm going to borrow some, and I'm going to ask for your take on this, because what I find fascinating about this conversation is we keep going back into the origin of this country. We keep going back to when Europeans arrived and how that social construct between the European settlers and natives was built. And one of the things that I see about America's approach to military policy and America's approach to law enforcement is it almost goes back to the time when the first European settlers were sitting scared in some new wood, right? And there were just dangerous people all around them in their mind. And this concept of, sometimes I think the way we view law in this country, the way we view military policy, is very much like a fortress. And you have to defend your fortress from this throngs of people who desire nothing but to do you ill. And I think we also have to recognize that in ourselves. We have to recognize that in our history. And we really have to apply that whenever we look at someone or something we label the other. Any thoughts there? I know I just went off on a total tangent, but I don't know.
Well, no, it's a good tangent. And, the thing I remember from that is the English had a basic formula. You're either with us or you're against us. Mm-hmm. And that has played out to the current day. And it's a dangerous one. And it goes with enemy civilization as a false, dangerous concept. And, English love pirates, there's a long history there. So, we've got a lot of rehabilitation. I'll end with this. I think, from my understanding of where we're at in the world, we have a few years left before there's a major tipping point, a major turning point, a major catastrophe. And if we don't get our system changed to be healthy by then, we've got a few more years and there's something even worse possible. And I think from a university educated perspective on Earth system science, we could push the Earth into a Mars-like or a Venus-like state. We could end it all except for bacteria, and I really have hope that the American system has mechanisms for change through voting, through dollar choices, through consumer choices. And we need to get way past this us and them enemy civilization. Everybody has suffered. And now I would like to introduce a peace treaty with the forces of humanity and the forces of nature. We need it. And, the military's got to help us get it. And that's where we're at.
Well, I think the fact you and I are here is at least a glimmer of hope that the right change is going to occur. I wish I had booked more than an hour. I think we could have kept going. So we're going to have to do this again. Thank you, Jo'Nathan, for joining me. And for those of you in Wisconsin or outside of Wisconsin interested in helping out the Wisconsin Green Party and their cause, I'm going to post links both on Facebook and on the show notes on ydhty.com when the podcast goes live.
Great. Thank you. Chimegwech.